Welcome to Angel City Culture Quest, where art, social justice, and the environment meet in Los Angeles. I am your host, Melina Paris, and I welcome you to this episode.
We're rolling. Everything's good.
Yay! Okay. Welcome to the live episode of Angel City Culture Quest, featuring Marie Thibeault and June Edmunds. Thank you, ladies, for taking part in this. Thank you, everybody. Marie Thibeault and June Edmunds. Consciousness through the lens of abstraction. June Edmunds and Marie Thibeault are both esteemed artists, each with notable careers. Through the lens of abstraction, their powerful works awaken you to dramatic ecosystemic flux and resilience and meditative contemplation of historicity and connection. Today, we explore their impactful works through color, rhythm, symbols, and the sublime, and the profound insights they offer on humanity's cultural and environmental relationships. I'm going to share with you, a lot of people know June and Marie, but I'm going to share their bios briefly with you. Marie is an internationally exhibited painter. Her oil paintings address the tension of urban landscape and the natural world. Inspired by frequent walks through various trails and open spaces in California, her works reveal her observations of the changes and dynamics of nature in the face of ongoing climate crisis. Engaging notions of abstraction, her work references the surrounding landscape using atmospheric color shifts, fragmented imagery, and multiple viewpoints to suggest the ideas of flux, change, and instability in the environment. Marie was a professor of painting and color theory at Cal State Long Beach for 30 years, where she developed an advanced studies in color class. June Edmunds is a recipient of the Kohler Fellowship, the Guggenheim and the California Community Foundation Fellowship for Visual Artists. June uses abstract painting to explore how color, repetition, movement, and balance can serve as conduits to spiritual contemplation and interpersonal connection to her African American roots. Exploring the psychological construct of skin color or tone through pattern and abstract painting has proven to be a revealing gesture, and these ideas are explored in her two ongoing series: the energy wheel paintings, inspired by her meditation practice, and her flag paintings, which explore the alignment of multiple identities such as race, nationality, gender, or political leanings. June's public artworks include a Venetian glass mosaic at the Metro Pacific Station in Long Beach. So, we all sat and talked before we actually met for this, and these are two wonderful abstract artists, and they're unique in their own ways. June does much work, consciousness, social issues, and Marie does a lot of work with the environment. But there are bridges, and when I talked to June, she had a wonderful thing that she said about the bridge between her and Marie. She said that what is exciting to her, and the one bridge between what she and Marie do, is that they are both very excited and concerned with formal issues of abstract painting. But the armature of their abstract painting is dealing with this whole other thing that you might not see when you first look at this work. When I told Marie, Marie asked if by armature June meant structure or composition.
Yes. What's armature? What's the armature?
So let's discuss your respective armatures and maybe the most obvious bridge between each of your works and concepts: mapping and geometric abstraction. Marie is marking history, geography, and mapping landscape events in the world. June, particularly through her migration series, is mapping history and diasporic exploration. I'll start with you, June. So, as abstract painters, how do you express these subjects through form and content?
How? Through form and content. Well, it's a starting place for me, you know. It's a starting place that there are ideas that I might start with, but initially it is the formal content, you know, sort of the decision to use the circle, for instance, is that's where one of my painting starts of abstraction began. So that is sort of a simple answer to that. Yeah.
So my paintings are abstract, but they're also landscape. I use a lot of landscape tropes, and so is to embody an experience. So there's horizontal and vertical anchors in the space, so that the viewer feels like they have stability, and that's a structure where I can play instability against it. So with geometry against linear structures that I work with, and essentially all the elements of abstraction as well as representation all end up being a metaphorical content. The content becomes metaphorical, but it's often driven from an encounter with the landscape or something that I know is going on in the news with climate change or environmental collapse and things like that.
June's Joy of Other Suns and Maria for Lost Cienega, which the second painting, which is on permanent exhibition at the Guatemala City Embassy. Both explore race and history using social abstraction as a means to navigate these complex issues in her paintings. June commemorates the historical contributions of African American female pioneers and early landowners in Southern California. And Marie said climate change is a big issue for all of us now, but she has always been into it. From the 1970s onward, it's a singular issue that is always in her work. Moving forward into rhythm and pattern, which is another link between these two artists, Marie observed that June has more secure repetition, and Marie's repetition is more chaotic. June, is that secure repetition to create stability amidst volatile historical narratives, or does it signify an authentic retelling of those narratives, such as with your painting Silence?
It is the former in most situations, where if and I am sort of projecting sort of this theme of social histories to my works and thinking about sort of the history and the survival of African Americans in this country, I think about what was necessary to make that possible, right? And so sitting next to Marie, I can't help but use the word chaos, right? And so the chaos of this history and sort of the need to create anything, like to create some form of the ability to live and thrive is to contain that chaos. and so and so I've never used those words before until we started doing sort of that exchange on the Google, what you were doing last night and what I was doing last night. And so when I think about, I love what you're saying about sort of you're making the structure that is the stability, and then sort of undermining and sort of creating chaos as a reaction to what is around you. It's sort of the chaos that sort of exists first, and then trying to contain that which you so eloquently evaluated in the work. And so also sort of the mark making of that, like our mark making, sort of the oppositional, way that we sort of create this mark making. My mark making is to sort of almost replicate what has occurred sort of within the tragic history of this country. But it is also a prayer as well. I see it as like a very Catholic thing to do, and I am not Catholic at all. But I think that they sort of count beads, right? And I'm sort of calming myself down, and counting and creating that kind of rhythm, in that way too.
And Marie, is that chaotic repetition a natural process derived from witnessing the landscapes that you traverse? Or is it a deliberate gesture after you've layered your photos and your drawings?
It's a deliberate gesture. The repetition is something that is necessary in a painting to keep it cohesive, but my impulse is to constantly undermine that.
Mm-hmm.
It's as though there's emerging structures. It is more of an urgent impulse than the methodical process that June is doing. But she's like, it's a methodical counting of time, and mine is like a constant anxiety of something about to happen, simultaneity, the future and the past. Mostly trying to get the viewer to feel like they are experiencing an event or simultaneity of an event, through time in their body. So the repetition is a way of counting time. It's a way of embedding time in painting. But the chaos for me is so my repetition is not predictable. It's broken. It's like broken symmetry. In a sense, I'm trying to provoke the viewer to, in a way, make an effort to make it whole. So the fact that it is off kilter, that it is unresolved, that it is kind of fractured and broken, is to provoke that sense of wanting to participate with it.
I love that. Love that. On rhythm, Marie said, music is the closest metaphor to what she's doing. She said, I start with geometry, then I work with line, and then more geometry. Then there's more line. So these are like musical structures. The geometry is almost like the beat or the stabilization. And then there's stuff pulling and pulling, and then there's stabilization. Marie observed June's work is embodied in rhythm and pattern, a continual sonic reading in her work, rhythm, scale, physicality of paint. It's very powerful because it's very physical and very optical. And Marie's work is more about drawing and something you have to decode. Marie observed one thing that connects the two of you is the metaphorical. June, there's a quote here about your circle curve series, which seems to relate well to rhythm and pattern and metaphor. If you'd like to discuss it about your series.
how it relates to that, your circle curve series.
Depends on which works, right?
Yeah.
You know, you had mentioned 2 works previously, Joy of Mother of Sons and For Maria. And so a series that I did like in 2021, they didn't have like the texture that's in these paintings. It's really sort of the underpainting that is being exposed, like these paintings, like what's under them is like a bunch of lives, but I just kind of the whole thing out. You know, so in this series, I sort of decided to leave those the first couple layers exposed. There's similarities in our work. There is a map. It's large and it's slow, you know, kind of movement where, you know, the opposite. That's how I respond. Sort of this opposite thing occurs when looking at yours. So I'm really just sort of talking about sort of these large migrational movements. You know, we were talking about our histories earlier, you know, and this whole group sort of just had this migration from the East Coast. Our families and probably most people in here, you know, can trace their migrations from east to west because, you know, we're as far west as we go. So that's just how it is. And so it's just, you know, these large moves and I am addressing sort of women's role in these migrations, the strength that they are within these moves. And so For Maria is really sort of where I started with that series. And I was doing some research for a public art that I was going for, and it was actually in the Beverly Hills area. And I just wanted to know sort of what to think. I wanted to learn some history because whatever you start digging, you find some stuff interesting, and you find a very multicultural kind of history. And so I learned about Maria Quinteros Valdez, who was the first inhabitant, you know, sort of, it's still a conquest sort of situation there. But after the Native Americans, in Maria Quinteros Valdez is an Afro-Latina, right? And granddaughter of Quinteros, who was one of the pobladores, the first that came to and settled in downtown, you know, and Alvera Street. And so here she was. I just thought that was amazing that the first person to quote unquote own land in Beverly Hills was this woman of color. And so I'm just like putting everything in this piece, you know. There's references, sort of a red line map to address sort of the irony of that whole thing. And if you guys aren't familiar with the red line maps, it's the series of maps that the housing department created in the 40s to let you know what these neighborhoods were composed of and who could live there and who could not live there, right? And so there was a whole bunch of people that couldn't live in these green areas of Beverly Hills in particular. So it wasn't only African Americans, it was Jewish people, it was Italian people, and so these neighborhoods were defined by sort of green or blue, yellow, and red, so we know what neighborhoods were the red. You know, so that was just this irony that I sort of threw that map in there sort of literally. I'll stop.
Very So Marie, one of the distinct things about your practice is drawing, which you say is like a thinking process for you. And I read when you moved to San Francisco and started to look at their newspapers, you said it was very different from the East Coast because they published every disaster. So you started drawing those types of images, and you still draw today. Your drawings are artworks themselves, but can you discuss how they inform the architecture of your paintings?
Okay. Basically, I draw as a daily practice to shift my brain from, the conscious to the subconscious to the intuitive. And the drawing practice is very different than the painting practice, but it's a way of testing ideas. For the paintings, mostly it's a way to orient my thinking to space and to memory, and sort of even automatic writing comes up. And it's a way of shifting my brain to then take on the more complex problem solving that happens in the paintings. But sometimes there's a persistent structure in the drawings, not always, that just wants to be there, and that will directly inform the paintings, or like a new form or structure that I'm trying out that will directly
Sort of an
inform it.
expansion.
Mm-hmm.
And you also use photography on your daily walks as a way of witnessing what's happening, which you said means something to you. This intimacy with the landscape, you said, is like mapping or accountability. Can you talk more about that accountability and what you're conveying in that?
I think it's about witnessing, but it's about immersion, like immersing myself in the environment and trying to see with fresh eyes anomalies or changes or events, like the fires in the canyon or floods or just things that fall down or very strange sort of wild urban anomalies.
Yeah.
And to me, those signify a particular place in time, a particular moment in time that we're living. And so I'm photographing those kind of events, little details that I weave into the paintings. And it's becoming more of like every walk now I take 20, 30, 40 pictures. So it's just becoming this real practice, that is helping to form my vision. Yeah, so it's just, it's really looking for the anomalies or the specific little details, like for instance, caution tape or cones or kites caught in the trees
yeah.
or the trees falling down, or just things like that are like, oh, that signifies something, that just occurred that's occurring on a greater scale.
Yeah.
And so I like to explore it in that way.
You also mentioned, you said it's like you're brave enough to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, we're going to talk about the sublime in a little bit, but that comes down to witnessing. I mean, we're all should, regard ourselves as, accountable for what's happening, but not everyone wants to really immerse themselves and witness things close up. But the landscape, I'm so attached to it, and moving through the space and participating with the space, I feel, deepens my ability to witness what's going on in the world.
Definitely.
In the larger scale.
That's great. So we're going to talk about June's painting, Silence. This painting was very recently acquired by the Kleefeld Contemporary Art Museum. Director Paul Baker Prindle came to Angel's Gate to do a video on local artists, which June was a subject of. Then he called her in 2023 and told her that he was thinking of acquiring that piece. June said it was a very thoughtful process as well. She was honored by that. Another painting of June's, titled Innocence, is a smaller version of Silence. And she noted that Silence garnered what June considers the most reaction to a piece that she has ever gotten. And in our discussion, She said, I think politically when I work, and I always want to put a positive spirit on things in such a way that when you talk about political things and hope that there's some action, that there's a shift that happens in somebody's belief that inspires them to create or take some action. I always want that process to be positive because that is the kind of action I like to inspire through the art. But with silence, you said that was different. Can you explain?
But I want to respond to Maria as well. And when you're talked about sort of keeping sort of the drawing occurring, I really love that. And I see it as this, you always just sort of keeping it alive, always just being so present with it, always being sort of ready for whatever thing comes through. And then for you to sort of talk about your walks, where you're like doing the same thing. Like you have your camera out, it's like this happened. You know, I just love sort of that parallel
Thanks,
of sort of being in this world.
Yeah, just taking it in.
Yeah. And I also love your sort of self-acknowledgement of your bravery. And I think that's sort of
That's
part
something we
of
share.
I'm trying to remember the word that you used, but it's part of that connection. And that is really sort of what I'm addressing. So I didn't say that it was two works that I got the most reaction from. What I said was those were my reactionary pieces. All right. and so there are these paintings. Like I have this series of flags, that I did from 2019 really to now, which are kind of reactionary as well, but it's sort of what I'm calling that positive spin. It's like this. Those flags came from a dream, all right? And so I had this residency in Kentucky, all right? And I applied for this residency in 2016. So who was president in 2016? And so I felt very safe. And then the end of 2016 occurred, and then this transition occurred, and I was like, oh, y'all, what am I to do? And a friend of mine is getting ready to do that, and she's doing the same thing. But anyway, this friend, she joked and said, well, if it gets too deep, you could jump into the Ohio River and swim over to Ohio, and you might be okay. That's the Mason-Dixon line. I don't have to explain that to my history teacher over here. So anyway, so being there at that time was precarious for me. And one thing I wanted to do while I was in this west side of Kentucky, the residency was in Paducah, Kentucky. I wanted to go to Memphis. I've never been to Memphis, music, I had to go. And, we're on these highways and they're not the 405, right? Where you don't know what neighborhood you're in when you're on the 405, right? And so, and LA was built that way, but you know the neighborhood you're in when you're driving from Paducah to Memphis. And so there was this one house that had like the biggest Confederate flag like in front of, and being from LA, we just didn't see that before 20. We didn't see that before 2016. And, so 6 months later, I'm like having a dream about flags. And here was my dream. I had a dream of 4 black flags that were just drooping and just didn't have life in them. And I'm like, what the hell does that mean? And, call your friends. What do you think that means? And
And so I was hoping, I was like, I'm not going to tell anybody because I'm going to jinx it, but I hope that means it's only going to be 4 years of this, right?
Well, that's good.
Right?
For the
But I don't want to
positive
tell. I don't want to, so anyway, so that was, so I'll try to quickly. So that reactionary thing, you know, I purposely didn't paint a Confederate flag, but you know, in 2020, COVID happened, and then the summer, we'll just call it the summer of George Floyd, occurred in 2020. And these things that the Black community felt we had to look at, you know, others weren't having sort of that bravery of looking at. And so this news was new news, but we were talking about it for decades and decades and decades. And so, like I said, it was just making me mad at that time because of people sort of coming to me and sort of wanting to have these conversations. You know, many of us experience this and being sad. And so now it's like, okay, you don't understand. You're wanting me to like put aside my anger and take care of you right now as you work through having a moment of bravery, right? And so that's what those paintings were. So it's like these paintings of the Confederate flag with just sort of these bleached out sort of confection colors, and all very purposeful as this sort of my experience. It's like this candy coated, icing coated, but to me it's still a Confederate flag. It's still very harmful. You're still asking very similar things, you know, of us. Yeah.
It's interesting. When I saw one of those paintings, I thought the color was feminist because it's like pink and gray and
I love that association
Yeah.
as well.
like taking like rebranding. the
You know,
color
because
and-
when you talk about caretaking,
Mhm.
who's really being asked of that?
Mhm.
Who's being asked? You know, so the trope of the, you know,
Yeah.
so it
the
can,
feminine is in there as well.
right.
It's a beautiful piece, and you all can see it at Kleefeld. We're going to have a quick intermission so people can partake in some food and wine and bubbly water. And we're going to do a raffle and listen to some music. Everybody relax and take a break, and we'll be right back. Hi, folks. This is your host, Melina Paris. For several months, we have been bringing you inspiring guests along with stimulating content about their work. As with anything, there are costs to keep this podcast going. So if you're able, I would deeply appreciate a donation of any size, even as little as $4 a month. This will help contribute to my ability to continue bringing you the great work of these artists and others and the cultural content that you want to hear about. I would be honored to have your support. To donate, please go to my Patreon link at patreon.com Angel City Culture Quest. There you can also see all of our past episodes. Thank you. Okay, thanks folks for staying and coming and listening to our second part. going to start. Can you hear this okay?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We're going to start with Marie. Marie, with the works that you've been recently creating, you said that you're addressing entanglement. What do you mean by that? And can you talk about the ways entanglement relates to the sublime, which is a theory that you addressed in the Feminine Sublime exhibition, which you had 3 paintings in, which were Shield, Exposure, and Eclipse.
I'm using the term entanglement pretty loosely. I mean, when you're reading and talking about the Anthropocene, the time of the Anthropocene, we perceive things more as interconnected. So I see entanglement as an interweaving of consciousness and awareness of many different things, different ideas, especially what we refer to as the more than human world. So it could be animals, it could be plant forms, and so on. So during this time, it connects to the immersion and trying to understand the bigger picture, the complexity of what's going on, and a sense that I am or we are co-participating with it, that we're not an observer or distant from it, but that we're co-participating in this immersion as things are unfolding. And then the concept of the historic sublime was one that the viewer was observing a danger or some type of overwhelming situation at a distance that they could soon overcome. And so it was like, encountering a threat. But the feminine sublime is about co-participation and just being within the chaos of the situation, not above it and not necessarily in control of it, but affected by that overall instability.
And with Eclipse, you've made both earth tones and pastels work together. There are both structures and water in it, and your horizon appears to be the ocean. At center is an hourglass figure, and crows populate the scene, as it were, which is a repeating theme in your work. These birds that are so intertwined with the human urban environment. What do the crows signify to you?
Just birds in general were a symbol that I could use to include the more than human world within the construct of the painting. But, thinking back to what birds mean, I mean, they are harbingers, they are often omens in history. When I was working with the cutout forms, I was thinking about the stencils as a negative space of what was missing, and I was thinking about endangered species, certain animals and birds that might be extinct. But so I see them. Another thing is it's a very fluid form because it's between the sky and the land. It's not particularly scale bound. So that was another way to use it as to make pattern too.
You folks can probably see there's some crows in here. This is Marie's work, as I'm sure you have gathered. And this is June's work. This one is untitled. The name
Capture.
Capture.
Mm-hmm.
This is Capture, by the way. They're beautiful. I think they look beautiful up here.
Yes.
I want to talk about Capital Chasm, June's work. Capital Chasm flag is a great name for one of June's flags, colored in royal purple, blues, earthy orange, browns, and green. June uses primary colors with the flags, and primary colors is browns. Is that correct?
Primary colors in relation to skin tone,
Yeah.
and they are browns and I'm sitting next to the queen of color right here, so I want to get this right. And but anyway, in African American diaspora, you know, that has, I guess, gone on for a long time. When I was growing up, we would refer to each other in primary color. Have you heard of that?
No, not until I read
You know
this. Yeah, I know, it's very interesting.
Yeah, so we would refer, and as you know, we have like these tones underneath our browns, which, to create a brown, you take a warm color and then add a little bit of blue color and that kind of thing. But in the vernacular, we might refer to each other as yellow, for certain kinds of skin tones. Usually it's light skin, and we might use the term red bone. If you're from New Orleans, you might use that. And also sort of using blue as somebody being so dark that they're blue. But we say it and we have respect for that and equate the beauty of being that dark. And so I decided, I was thinking about sort of using that kind of analogy with paintings that included skin tones because of a show that Isabel Luderot did called Skin, like 2016 or something. And so it was an open call, and I was trying to get this painting together that was doing this, but didn't finish it. And so as I had this dream to do these flags, I was like, I don't know if I want to go all the way black on them. Maybe I'll use skin tones in that way. So instead of red, white, and blue, I'll use red, yellow, and blue.
Okay. On Capital Chasm, on that piece, each painted stripe in her flag appears as though they've been stitched together.
Thank you. It's basically that flag series.
Yeah.
And in the flag series, I named the flags after people or ideas of these Americans that believed in democracy more than other folk, and believed in freedom in a way that their dreams of freedom went beyond whatever freedom was visualized when it was written about, when it was first written about. So, Capital Chasm, there are two flags. One is the Shad Carey flag, and Shad Carey is named after an abolitionist woman by the name of Mary Shad Carey. And one of the things that she said was, and it was basically about the idea of democracy, that sort of this idea of democracy, she says, there is a chasm that is far and deep, as opposed to what's actually happening, in the world. So that's what she said then. And it's just interesting to think about, how much things have changed and not changed. Great things, of course, have changed.
Yeah. And you have the river leaves.
Yes.
You talked about first seeing the river leaf symbol years back when you saw the artwork of Benin and the Benin plaques on which the beautiful sculptures faces looked like family to you. So you developed a relationship with the symbol, and most of the plaques are incised with leaf-like patterns, or the river leaf. What first inspired you about that river leaf?
Well, sort of the connection to artwork of Benin, which is a country in Africa. Well, I always felt a connection to that work, sort of like looking at those faces, sort of look like family members. And so there were sculptures, and then there were the plaques, which were created in a separate region, close but a separate region. And I took another look at the plaques only because I was teaching an art history class and I had this plaque projected. And it felt like I was seeing these symbols that were going on in the negative space of these plaques very differently. And I just felt they were communicating, so strongly. And so I thought about it and sort of looked them up and saw that they were in most of the Benin plaques, which were these plaques that and there were hundreds and hundreds of them, and you might have heard about them being in the news. They're part of what Nigeria, because the Benin Kingdom is in Nigeria, so now you've got the country of Benin next to the country of Nigeria. So they're asking for those plaques back, and that's been in the news. But there's hundreds of those things that line the palaces at the time. And you could go to these museums in Europe if you really want to see them, and that you might think that's a shame if you feel that they belong in Africa. But I saw them in a group for the first time at the British Museum, and it was pretty amazing. But even then, they were small, and I didn't really connect with that symbol that was going on in every one of those plaques. So I started working with that symbol and sort of learned that it was connected, of course, to the kingdom of Benin and to the royals, and thought was these symbols that are energizing and empowering the royals really can empower all of us. That symbol, there's something very universal about that symbol. And it's called the quadrifour. And interestingly enough, like during the Academy Awards, when the Native American woman that was nominated, what's her name?
What's her name?
Gold. Her last name was Lily Black. If you look at her role, there was a version, and that was a collaboration between Native American designers. So I was so thrilled to see that. Yeah.
There was just another part when we mentioned Capital Chasm. There's a connection. You shared some deep thoughts. You mentioned Black colloquialism and the connection between Africa and primary colors. And last but not least, Frederick Douglass's visit with President Lincoln. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so what I was saying earlier, I was sort of alluding to, is just sort of the belief in democracy, sort of using that quote. And there's so many other quotes, like W.B. Du Bois, sort of talking about just the commitment to sort of this American idealism, sort of being so present in African Americans. And so I brought up Frederick Douglass. As you probably know, he met with the president a couple times. And so the president had just okayed Black people to serve in the Civil War. Like, he was very reluctant about that because he was just trying to keep the country together. But he agreed to that, and so the Black troops were being treated really unfairly, not being paid, being paid half of what white troops. We're talking about the Union Army. That when they were being captured, when the Confederate Army was capturing African Americans, just the torture was just, really horrendous. And so Frederick Douglass wasn't invited to the White House, but he went to the White House and just sort of went past the line of the senators or whoever wanted to talk to the president. He went in and talked to the president, and sort of this mutual respect was garnered at that time. But that this conversation occurred that needed to happen in subsequent conversations that needed to happen, for the president to acknowledge that some things need to be fixed. But his attitude was still sort of a go slow, we're trying to keep it together kind of thing. So it's just really needed that Frederick Douglass was there just to keep the pen, on his feet. Right. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Well, that does it for our part of the show, but we'd like to open this up for questions, if anybody has any for the artists. Please stand up and ask away. Lynn! Hi.
Thank you for inviting us to your first live one. It's pretty cool.
Thank you.
I don't know if you covered this in the beginning, but did the both of you already know each other and meet before this?
Mhm.
Yes. And most of us facing that part. And how did you originally first get connected or know about each other's work? Either one.
I want to talk first.
You just talk.
I want to talk first. Because I remember the day I saw her work. It's like, was at an exhibition here. Like, I saw her work before we met. And I was like, oh, it's this woman that painted this. I just loved your work from the moment I saw it.
Yeah, okay, you're done. Well, I heard about you and I knew your work, but when I saw your studio during one of the open studios, I went, oh my goodness, look at her go with the color and the deliberate density and it was very inspiring. Since then, we've done studio visits.
Mm-hmm.
We have taught together at Cal State Long Beach.
She's a mentor to everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, June took over the graduate class after I left.
Yeah.
So we've had dialogues, and now we're, just always happy to see each other.
I'm in her studio now at Angel State.
Yeah, she just moved into Studio B, Bill, upstairs, and
So floored.
the original. I'm going to show you a picture.
I can't wait.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I don't remember which of you said about the redlining in Beverly Hills and that. How did it affect your life in the aftermath of discovering those things?
That's your question.
Well, I think it's affected everybody's life. It's affected everybody's life. You've separated people and you sort of define this thing. And so my parents came in the 50s, and the name of this painting, Joy of Other Sons, that is inspired by Isabel Wilkerson, who the movie Origin is based on her second book, which is Caste, but her first book was called Joy of Other Sons. And she's such a great writer. I highly recommend both of her books. But she just talks about sort of the migration pattern of African Americans. And so my parents were sort of in this wave, sort of this second wave of and so when Black folks came here, and she talks about the guy that came from Louisiana to California not being able to cross Western, like Black folks couldn't cross Western when my parents came, and that first house, that I had, was like on Western and 36th or something like that. So it's affected everybody, so that's what I wish folk would understand, is that when you don't allow people to integrate with each other, and I don't, to exchange with each other, it's a great loss to everybody.
Yeah, it's a great loss to everybody.
I have a question about your painting style. How do you keep the preciseness of color separation with such strong colors?
It's the brushes, it's the paint, the artist probably can figure it out, where like each row, like the sort of the thickness of the brush strokes is just according to how thick that paintbrush is. In this painting, it's an oil. I'm using acrylic now, but it's the amount of medium I'm using that sort of keeps the color sort of separate. I'm deliberately not blending it.
Yeah, it's just very deliberate. It's a very deliberate process.
Hey, I was just looking through the flyer series, and it really reminds me of quilting in a way.
I'm so inspired by textile.
It has that layer that looks like fabric, even though you're saying it's like. And I was wondering about if that did inspire you, because you were talking about women's work as and that's a woman's craft.
Thank you. I love you said that.
It just looks like you could kind of crawl under it and be there for a while.
Oh, that's nice.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any other questions?
I have a question for Marie. Marie, all I want to ask you about is scale, because your ideas are so huge and the landscape that you are inspired by is so huge, and you sort of talk about sort of the containment of it from looking at it from afar and then going up and seeing just how that. So how do you decide what scale you're going to be working?
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much stay large. The small paintings have a different function for me. They become pictorial, they become too like objects.
Yeah.
But the large paintings are usually like 70, 75, 80 inches. And they're just enough to, contain the body and the periphery, so that it is an actual confrontation with the painting is what happens. So, the sky is the head, and the horizon is the heart, and the below is the feet, and the sides are, it's an actual imprint of the body.
Wow.
So that's how I encounter the landscape, and that's how I want the viewer to behold the painting, is to get a sense that these things are correlating with their body.
Yes.
As they're seeing it in person.
That.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
To both of you, you mentioned the photos that you take, obviously the artwork you both do, and maybe I missed this. Have you considered or have you done anything in book form with your artwork? Have you thought in terms of it?
I have not.
Too busy. No, I mean, it's I totally adore beautiful books.
Mm-hmm.
Books are the thing I love, but I'm not going to make a book right now, I don't think. I mean, it's just not in my schedule right now.
What's interesting, though, is like in your studio, like all of your resource materials that could like easily.
I have piles of photographs and documents, and then transparencies made from them, and then piles of drawings going on. So there's a lot of paperwork and things that could become a book, I think. Yeah, that's true.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us. I really appreciate you being here. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please have some food. There's some wine left if anybody would like some, and there's sparkling water and music.
Yay!
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show,
Please rate and recommend on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.